gods of Rome were not distant figures, but active participants in daily life, concerned with matters both monumental and mundane. They required proper recognition, and in return, ensured Rome prospered under their divine protection. This practical approach to divinity shaped Roman civilization from its earliest days until its eventual decline. Tonight, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of ancient Roman mythology. Get ready to meet the gods and goddesses who once ruled both the heavens and our imaginations. For your ultimate comfort, the screen will go dark soon, so get comfortable, dim the lights, and let this epic journey begin. Chapter 1: Jupiter, King of the Gods. Among all the deities of ancient Rome, none commanded greater reverence than Jupiter Optimus Maximus, best and greatest, King of the gods and sovereign of the heavens. From his temple atop the Capitoline Hill, the most sacred of the 7 hills of Rome, Jupiter watched over his chosen people and guided the destiny of their growing empire. Jupiter, whose name derives from the ancient words for Sky Father, controlled the thunder and lightning. When storms raged across Roman lands, citizens knew their chief deity expressed his power and might. Romans feared these celestial displays, interpreting thunderbolts as direct communications from their divine protector, sometimes as warnings, other times as omens of approval. The Romans believed Jupiter personally supervised their state affairs. Newly elected consuls, the highest officials of the Republic, would process immediately to Jupiter's temple to offer sacrifices upon taking office. No major military campaign commenced without first seeking his blessing, and victorious generals would process to his temple to give thanks for success in battle during the sacred triumph ceremony. The majestic temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus stood as the religious center of the Roman world. Constructed under the early kings and rebuilt several times throughout Roman history, this grand structure housed an enormous statue of the god seated on a throne, holding his thunderbolt and scepter. The temple roof featured a magnificent terracotta quadriga, a chariot drawn by 4 horses, representing the sun crossing the heavens under Jupiter's command. Jupiter presided over oaths and treaties, making him the divine enforcer of human promises. Romans swore their most solemn oaths by his name, believing that Jupiter would strike down any who violated these sacred promises. International treaties received his divine sanction, and those who broke faith faced not just human retribution, but divine punishment as well. As chief deity of the Roman state religion, Jupiter formed part of the Capitoline triad alongside Juno and Minerva. These 3 deities shared the grand temple complex atop the Capitoline, each with their own dedicated cella or inner chamber. Together, they represented the divine protection afforded to Rome and her people, guarding the city in both peace and war. During the ancient festival of the Fyrii Latini, Latin communities gathered on the Alban Mount to honor Jupiter Laetius, protector of the Latin League. This ceremony, dating to the earliest days of Rome, continued for centuries as a reminder of shared heritage and divine protection. A white bull would be sacrificed, and representatives from each community would partake of the sacred meat, renewing their bonds under Jupiter's watchful eye. The IDs of each month belonged to Jupiter, but the IDs of September held special significance. On this day, the anniversary of the dedication of his Capitoline temple, Romans drove a nail into the wall of his sanctuary, symbolically securing the good fortune of Rome for another year, and marking the passage of time under divine oversight. Jupiter also oversaw justice and righteous rule. Roman magistrates derived their authority from him, symbolized by the curule chair upon which they sat in judgment. The fasces, bundles of rods carried by lictors before important officials, represented Jupiter's authority transferred to mortal representatives for the governance of his favored people. As Rome expanded from city to empire, Jupiter expanded with it. Far-flung provinces erected temples to Jupiter, often syncretizing him with their local chief deities. In these distant outposts of Roman civilization, Jupiter represented not just divine power, but the authority of Rome itself. Roman soldiers carried his eagle standards into battle across 3 continents, believing the king of gods marched alongside them. The Romans viewed Jupiter not as a distant, unapproachable figure, but as the divine father of their state. Just as the paterfamilias headed the Roman household with both authority and responsibility, Jupiter headed the divine family with power tempered by obligation to his people. He demanded proper worship, but in return, ensured Roman prosperity and victory. Throughout centuries of Roman history, as political systems changed from monarchy to republic to empire, Jupiter remained constant, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining his essential role as divine protector. Even as Eastern mystery religions gained popularity in later imperial times, Jupiter never lost his central place in Roman religious life. From the humblest farm to the grandest temple, Romans acknowledged the sovereignty of the Thunderer, the best and greatest of gods, Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Chapter 2, Juno, Queen of Heaven. Alongside mighty Jupiter ruled his consort and sister, Juno Regina, Queen of Heaven and Protectress of Rome. Fierce and majestic, Juno embodied divine femininity in its most powerful aspect. While Jupiter commanded the heavens with thunderbolts, Juno wielded influence over matters equally vital to Roman life, governing marriage, childbirth, and the well-being of the state itself. Romans knew Juno by many epithets, each revealing a different facet of her divine power. As Juno Lucina, she guided women through the perils of childbirth, bringing infants safely into the light of day. Roman women in labor called upon her mercy, and grateful mothers made offerings at her temples for safe deliveries. Her festival, the Matronalia, celebrated on the first day of March, saw husbands giving gifts to their wives and offering prayers for the continued harmony of their households. As Juno Monita, the warner, she protected Rome through divine alerts and omens. Her sacred geese, kept on the Capitoline Hill, famously saved Rome by raising the alarm when Gallic invaders attempted a night attack in the 4th century before Common Era. So important was this aspect of Juno that the Romans established their first mint beside her temple, giving us the modern word money from her epithet moneta. Juno Suspita, the savior, appeared in artwork wearing a goatskin cloak and carrying a shield and spear, ready to defend her people from harm. Her ancient temple at Lanuvium remained an important pilgrimage site throughout Roman history. Each year, young girls would perform a ritual at her sanctuary, offering food to a sacred snake. If the snake accepted the offering, Romans believed the harvest would be bountiful and the girls pure of heart. Perhaps most significantly for Roman women, Juno Regina presided over marriage. No Roman bride would dare marry without seeking her blessing. On their wedding day, brides were adorned to emulate the goddess, and the traditional wedding month of June derives its name from her. The proper performance of marriage rituals ensured Juno's favor for the new household, promising fertility, harmony, and prosperity. Juno formed a crucial part of the Capitoline triad alongside Jupiter and Minerva. In the great Capitoline temple, her sacred chamber stood to the left of Jupiter's central cella, symbolizing her essential role in divine governance. During state ceremonies, priests would invoke her immediately after Jupiter, recognizing her status as Queen of the Heavens and co-protector of Rome. The Romans celebrated Juno's most famous festival, the Matronalia, with great enthusiasm. On this day, the Kalends of March married women processed to her temple on the Esquiline Hill. There they removed their outer garments and loosened their hair, symbolically releasing themselves from constraints. They brought flowers to the goddess and received gifts from their husbands and loved ones. For this one day, the normal social order reversed, with wives commanding their households and even receiving service from their servants. Unlike many divine couples, Juno maintained a distinct identity and sphere of influence separate from her consort. While Jupiter might reign over state affairs and warfare, Juno concerned herself with the continuation of Roman families and the integrity of the home. Romans understood that a civilization required both aspects to flourish, the public triumph and the domestic foundation. The relationship between Juno and Jupiter reflected Roman ideals of marriage, not always perfect, but fundamentally unbreakable and essential to proper order. While myths spoke of their quarrels and reconciliations, their divine union represented the sacred marriage upon which Roman society itself was built. Together, these celestial spouses ensured the continuation of their divine favor toward Rome. Juno took special interest in protecting Roman women throughout their lives. Young girls offered their childhood toys to the goddess when they reached maturity. Brides sacrificed to her before their wedding night. Mothers thanked her after successful births. Even elderly women continued to honor her as the guardian of their domestic authority. At every significant transition in female life, Juno stood as divine witness and protector. The sacred shields of Rome, the Ancilia, fell under her protection. According to legend, one shield fell from heaven during the reign of King Numa Pompilius. The king ordered 11 identical copies made to confuse anyone who might try to steal the divine original. Priests of Mars, the Salii, would process through Rome carrying these shields during festivals, performing ritual dances and singing ancient hymns that few Romans of later eras could even understand. So archaic was their language. Even in warfare, Juno played a crucial role. Roman generals would carefully observe birds sacred to her before battle, believing she sent omens indicating whether they should advance or retreat. Disregarding these signs could lead to disaster, as many failed commanders learned too late. Her approval meant more than mere military advantage. It confirmed that Rome fought with divine sanction. Juno's majestic presence in Roman religion remained constant throughout centuries of political change. From kingdom to republic to empire, Romans continued to honor the Queen of Heaven, understanding that her favor ensured not just individual household prosperity, but the continuation of Roman civilization itself. In her varied aspects, Juno embodied the complexity and strength of Roman womanhood, fierce in protection, steadfast in devotion, and essential to the perpetuation of society. Chapter 3, Minerva, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Completing the Capitoline triad that watched over Rome stood Minerva, goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, medicine, poetry, crafts, and commerce. Unlike her divine companions Jupiter and Juno, Minerva was not among the oldest deities of Rome, but came to prominence as Roman civilization grew in complexity and cultural sophistication. Her adoption into the highest echelon of Roman divinity reflected the growing Roman appreciation for arts, sciences, and tactical brilliance. Minerva emerged fully formed into the world. According to Roman tradition, she sprang directly from the head of Jupiter after he experienced a terrible headache. The Divine Father had swallowed her pregnant mother, Medes, fearing a prophecy that his child would surpass him in wisdom. When Jupiter's head split open, Minerva emerged fully grown and armed, giving a mighty war cry that resonated across heaven and earth. This unusual birth marked her as a deity of intellectual rather than physical creation, born from thought itself. Romans depicted Minerva wearing a helmet and carrying a spear and shield, emphasizing her role as patroness of defensive warfare and strategic combat. Unlike Mars, who represented the fury and passion of battle, Minerva embodied the intellectual aspects of warfare, tactical planning, defensive fortifications, and the protection of civilization through judicious application of force. Generals sought her blessing not for bloodlust, but for the wisdom to deploy troops effectively and minimize casualties. Beyond warfare, Minerva presided over all forms of craft and skilled work. Artisans of every type considered her their divine patron, from weavers and dyers to sculptors and painters. No workshop in Rome would lack a small shrine to Minerva, where craftspeople would offer incense and prayers before beginning important projects. Her festival, the Quinquatria, celebrated each March, saw artisans and students alike taking holidays to honor the goddess who bestowed technical skill and learning. As patroness of medicine, Minerva taught humans the healing arts. Physicians invoked her name before performing surgeries or preparing remedies. Her sacred animal, the owl, symbolized her ability to see what others could not, penetrating the darkness of ignorance and illness with the light of wisdom and healing knowledge. Roman medical texts often began with dedications to Minerva Medica, acknowledging her divine oversight of the healing professions. Poets, musicians, and teachers also fell under Minerva's divine protection. The Romans believed she inspired artistic creation through divine wisdom rather than emotional frenzy. Unlike some artistic deities who represented untamed creative passion, Minerva stood for disciplined intellect applied to artistic endeavors, the perfect marriage of technique and inspiration. Schools and academies throughout the Roman world displayed her image, encouraging students to emulate her disciplined pursuit of knowledge. The Romans celebrated Minerva during the 5-day festival of Quinquatria, beginning on March 19th. During this celebration, students enjoyed a holiday from their studies, teachers received gifts, and artisans processed through the streets carrying the tools of their trades. Gladiatorial contests held during this festival honored her martial aspect, while musical competitions celebrated her patronage of the arts. The diverse nature of Quinquatria festivities reflected the wide range of human endeavors that fell under her divine protection. The olive tree was sacred to Minerva, representing both peace and prosperity through skilled cultivation. Romans believed she had gifted humanity with this valuable plant, teaching them to extract its oil for food, medicine, and lamp fuel. The olive branch became a symbol of her blessing, representing the benefits of civilization and technical knowledge properly applied for human flourishing. In her temple on the Aventine Hill, scribes and actors gathered to honor the goddess who presided over their professions. This temple, separate from her Capitoline sanctuary, maintained special significance for those who worked with words, whether written or performed. Playwrights would offer the first copy of their new works at her altar, seeking her blessing before presenting their creations to the public. While other deities might be approached with elaborate ceremonial or emotional fervor, Romans approached Minerva with rational prayer and thoughtful offerings. Her worship reflected her nature, valuing substance over spectacle, quiet contemplation over dramatic display. Those seeking her favor would demonstrate their commitment through disciplined study or masterful craftsmanship, rather than merely through sacrifice or ritual. Minerva represented the Roman ideal of practical wisdom, knowledge applied to improve human life rather than abstract philosophy pursued for its own sake. This practical orientation made her particularly beloved in Roman society, which valued useful arts and applicable knowledge over theoretical speculation. Even her strategic approach to warfare emphasized defensive tactics that preserved Roman lives while ensuring victory, rather than glory-seeking or reckless courage. Throughout the Roman world, from Britain to Syria, craftspeople maintained small household shrines to Minerva, keeping a lamp burning before her image while they worked. Doctors consulted her through divination before difficult procedures. Students offered her the first fruits of their learning. Generals contemplated her statues while developing battle plans. In every domain requiring skill, precision, and intellect, Romans acknowledged the divine wisdom of Minerva, the bright-eyed goddess who taught humanity the arts of civilization itself. Chapter 4: Mars, God of War and Agriculture. In the Roman pantheon, few deities commanded greater respect or devotion than Mars, god of war and agriculture. Second only to Jupiter in importance, Mars embodied the dual nature of Roman society itself, a people whose prosperity sprang from both agricultural abundance and military might. His complex character reflected the evolution of Rome from farming village to world empire, never losing its connection to the soil, even as its legions conquered distant lands. Unlike his later associations, the earliest incarnation of Mars existed primarily as an agricultural guardian, protecting the fields from harm and ensuring bountiful harvests. Early Italic farmers invoked his name to drive away diseases from their crops and dangers from their herds. This agricultural aspect never fully disappeared, even as his martial characteristics grew more prominent with Roman military expansion. The Romans maintained awareness that the same strength that defended borders also protected farmland, understanding that warfare and agriculture represented two expressions of the same vital force. March, named for Mars, marked both the beginning of the military campaign season and the time for spring planting, perfectly embodying his dual nature. During this month, priests performed ancient ceremonies to purify the sacred weapons and shields kept in the Regia, the old royal palace in the Forum. Simultaneously, farmers prepared their fields for the growing season, offering prayers to Mars for protection of their crops. This concurrent timing was no coincidence, but a reflection of the god's responsibility for both martial and agricultural prosperity. According to Roman tradition, Mars held special significance as the father of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. The divine father of the Roman people, Mars took particular interest in their welfare and expansion. Romans considered themselves literally the children of Mars, inheriting his strength, discipline, and connection to the land. This divine parentage justified both Roman agricultural excellence and military dominance as expressions of their inherited nature. The sacred animal of Mars, the wolf, featured prominently in the founding mythology of Rome. A she-wolf suckled the abandoned twins Romulus and Remus, saving the sons of Mars from certain death. Statues depicting this scene appeared throughout the Roman world, reminding citizens of their divine heritage. The wolf embodied the protective ferocity that Mars bestowed upon his people, a controlled savagery directed toward defending home and hearth. Two distinct colleges of priests served Mars in Rome. The Salii, or leaping priests, performed elaborate dances, wearing archaic armor and carrying the sacred shields of Mars. Their ceremonies, conducted in March and October to open and close the campaign season, included ritual processions through Rome and banquets of legendary extravagance. The ancient hymns they sang preserved some of the oldest Latin language known, so old that even educated Romans of the later Republic barely understood their meaning. The Arval Brethren, another ancient priesthood dedicated to Mars, focused primarily on his agricultural aspects. These 12 priests performed rituals, asking Mars to protect the boundaries of Roman land and ensure fertile fields. Their ceremony included a specific dance and song, the Carmen Arvale, performed while circling an altar. This brotherhood continued their ancient ceremonies virtually unchanged for over 1,000 years, preserving agricultural rituals from Rome's earliest days into the imperial period. The Romans dedicated the Campus Martius, Field of Mars, as a training ground for their army. This large, flat area, outside the sacred boundary of the city proper, allowed soldiers to practice maneuvers, young men to train for military service, and citizens to gather for athletic competitions that maintained their martial readiness. During the Republic, citizens would gather here for the census and voting assemblies, emphasizing the connection between civic responsibility and martial virtue under the watchful eye of Mars. The Romans celebrated several festivals honoring different aspects of Mars throughout the year. The October horse sacrifice, held after the campaign season ended, saw a chariot race followed by the sacrifice of the right-hand horse from the winning team. Priests would rush the horse's blood to the sacred hearth of Vesta, creating a symbolic circuit connecting Mars and Vesta, war and home, outer protection, and inner sanctity. This ceremony, archaic even to the Romans themselves, demonstrated the integration of Mars into the most fundamental religious concepts of Roman society. Unlike deities imported from conquered territories, Mars remained distinctly Roman in character and worship, even as Hellenic influences transformed many aspects of Roman religion. Mars maintained his unique dual nature as agricultural guardian and war god. Romans resisted fully equating him with the Greek Ares, understanding that their patron deity encompassed a broader, more complex divine portfolio than mere battle frenzy. The red planet visible in the night sky bore the name of Mars, its ruddy color associated with blood and iron. Romans observed its movements carefully, believing the planet could provide omens regarding military matters and farm prosperity alike. Astrologers claimed those born under its influence would display courage, determination, and physical vigor, qualities valued in both warriors and farmers. Throughout Roman history, successful generals dedicated temples and monuments to Mars in gratitude for victories. Emperor Augustus built a magnificent temple to Mars' altar, the Avenger, in his forum, housing the standards recovered from the Parthians within its sacred space. This temple became central to imperial military ceremony, where young men assuming the toga of manhood would dedicate their childhood amulets. Commanders would receive their insignia before departing for provinces, and returning generals would place their laurels after successful campaigns. Even as Rome transformed from republic to empire, changing from a society of citizen soldiers to one with a professional army, devotion to Mars remained constant. From the earliest farming communities on the Palatine Hill to the vast imperial domains stretching across 3 continents, Romans maintained their connection to Mars, the divine father who taught them to both cultivate the earth and defend it with disciplined courage. In Mars, Romans saw their ideal selves, practical yet fierce, rooted in tradition yet adaptable, drawing strength from the soil they defended with their blood. Chapter 5, Venus, Goddess of Love and Beauty. Though not among the oldest deities of Rome, no goddess captured Roman imagination more completely than Venus, divine embodiment of love, beauty, prosperity, and victory. Originally a minor garden goddess concerned with vegetation and fertility, Venus rose to prominence through political association and cultural evolution, until she stood among the most powerful divinities of the Roman pantheon, claimed as divine ancestress by emperors, and celebrated in magnificent temples throughout the empire. The earliest incarnation of Venus in Roman religion bore little resemblance to her later glamorous aspect. Ancient Latin peoples worshipped her as Venus Closina, purifier associated with the flowing waters that cleansed the earliest settlement. They also knew her as Venus Libitina, connected with funerary rites, demonstrating her original concern with the full cycle of life, from birth through death. These archaic aspects never completely disappeared, but became overshadowed by her later associations with love and beauty. The transformation of Venus began with her identification with the Greek goddess Aphrodite, as Hellenic cultural influences spread through Italy. This association brought new myths and artistic representations, embedding Venus within a rich tapestry of stories that captured Roman imagination. Artists depicted her with unprecedented beauty, inspiring poets, sculptors, and painters to create some of the most exquisite artwork of the ancient world in her honor. Venus gained extraordinary political importance when the Julian family claimed direct descent from her through her mortal son Aeneas. According to legend embraced by Romans, Aeneas fled the destruction of Troy, carrying his father on his shoulders and leading his young son by the hand. Guided by his divine mother Venus, Aeneas eventually reached Italy, where his descendants would found the Roman state. This story, immortalized in the Aeneid, cemented Venus as the divine mother of the Roman people themselves. Julius Caesar dedicated a magnificent temple to Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, in his Forum, emphasizing his divine ancestry and placing Venus at the center of Roman political life. The temple housed not only a cult statue of extraordinary beauty, but also precious artworks, including a famous pearl dedicated by Cleopatra. Caesar introduced sacred games in honor of Venus, further elevating her worship throughout Rome. Emperor Augustus continued and expanded the political association with Venus begun by his adopted father. The Julian star, a comet that appeared after Caesar's assassination, was interpreted as Caesar joining Venus in the heavens. Augustus used imagery of Venus extensively in his program of moral and religious revival, emphasizing her aspects as mother and bringer of peace rather than erotic associations. Under imperial patronage, Venus evolved from love goddess to divine protectress of Rome itself. Romans recognized Venus in many aspects, each revealing a different facet of her divine power. As Venus Verticordia, turner of hearts, she guided young women toward virtue and modesty. As Venus Felix, the fortunate, she brought good luck and happiness to her devotees. As Venus Victrix, the victorious, she granted success in all endeavors, from military campaigns to romantic pursuits. This multiplicity of aspects allowed Venus to transcend simple categorization, evolving into a complex deity capable of addressing many human needs. The most famous temple of Venus in Rome stood on the Capitoline Hill as the Temple of Venus Uricina. Established after consultation with the Sibylline books during the darkest days of the war against Hannibal. This temple, modeled after her famous sanctuary at Eryx in Sicily, introduced aspects of Venus as protector in wartime, blending her powers of love with those of victory. Roman generals would visit this temple before departing for campaigns, seeking the favor of Venus, who could charm even Mars himself with her beauty. Venus presided over gardens and growing things, maintaining her ancient connection to fertility and abundance, even as her worship grew more sophisticated. Romans planted myrtle, her sacred plant, around her temples, and used it in garlands during her festivals. The rose, another plant sacred to her, appeared in artwork depicting the goddess and featured prominently in her April festivals, symbolizing both beauty and the fleeting nature of physical pleasure. The Romans celebrated Venus during the Veneralia festival each April, when married women would visit her temple to request harmony in their marriages. During this celebration, women would remove the jewelry and ornaments from the statue of Venus Verticordia and ritually bathe it, then adorn it with fresh roses. Women would also offer incense to Fortuna Virilis, asking that men might not see their physical imperfections. These ceremonies emphasized Venus as promoter of marital concord rather than illicit passion. Beyond romantic love, Venus governed human bonds of all kinds. Romans invoked her to strengthen family ties, promote social harmony, and even seal political alliances. Her power to create connection between individuals extended into every aspect of Roman society. When Romans spoke of charming speech or persuasive manner, they credited these gifts to Venus, acknowledging her influence over all forms of human attraction and goodwill. Venus traveled wherever Romans established colonies, her worship adapted to local traditions while maintaining her essential character. In North Africa, she blended with Carthaginian Tanit. In Gaul, she merged with local fertility goddesses. In Syria, she incorporated aspects of Astarte. This adaptability made Venus truly universal, a goddess whose fundamental concerns with love, beauty, and human connection transcended cultural boundaries, even as her specific worship practices evolved to suit local conditions. The planet Venus, brightest in the night sky, bore her name and reinforced her cosmic significance. Romans observed its movements carefully, believing its positions foretold matters of love, harmony, and fruitfulness. When visible as the morning star, Romans called it Lucifer, the light bringer, as evening star, Vesper. Both manifestations belong to Venus, representing different facets of her divine influence over human affairs. Throughout Roman history, Venus remained beloved by people at every level of society. Emperors built grand temples in her honor, seeking to associate themselves with her divine favor. Soldiers carried her image into battle as a promise of victory. Merchants sought her blessing for prosperity. Lovers whispered prayers to her by moonlight. In her complex, evolving divine personality, Venus embodied the Roman capacity for for cultural synthesis and adaptation, transforming from simple garden goddess to divine protectress of an empire, yet never losing her fundamental association with the most powerful force in human experience, love itself. Chapter 6. Mercury, Messenger of the Gods. Swift-footed and silver-tongued, Mercury moved between worlds with unmatched ease. As messenger of the gods and divine patron of travelers, merchants, thieves, and orators, this versatile deity embodied communication and exchange in all its forms. Though not among the oldest gods of Rome, Mercury quickly became essential to daily Roman life, especially as trade and commerce grew more central to Roman prosperity. The name Mercury derives from the Latin word for merchandise, reflecting his primary association with commerce and trade. Roman merchants considered him their special patron, offering portions of their profits at his temples and placing his image in their shops and storehouses. Market days often coincided with festivals honoring Mercury, when traders would sprinkle their wares and themselves with water from Mercury's sacred well near the Porta Capena, believing this ritual would wash away both physical impurities and dishonesty in business dealings. Romans depicted Mercury wearing a broad-brimmed traveler's hat and winged sandals, carrying the caduceus, a staff entwined with two serpents. These attributes emphasized his role as divine messenger, capable of traveling between the realms of gods, humans, and even the underworld with unmatched speed. The Romans believed Mercury guided not just communication between realms, but also souls on their final journey after death, serving as psychopomp or soul guide for the departed. The Romans dedicated a temple to Mercury on the Aventine Hill in 495 before Common Era, establishing the Mercuralia festival celebrated each May. During this festival, merchants would sprinkle themselves and their shops with water drawn from his sacred well using laurel branches. They would also pray to Mercury for forgiveness of past dishonest dealings and success in future business. This practical approach to Mercury's worship reflected the Roman emphasis on religion as a contractual relationship with the divine rather than a system of abstract morality. Beyond commerce, Mercury presided over boundaries and crossroads, places of transition where different worlds meet. Travelers would leave small offerings at roadside shrines to Mercury before setting out on journeys, seeking his protection on unfamiliar paths. These herms, often simple pillars with his head carved at the top, marked boundaries between properties, cities, and territories, invoking Mercury's presence at points of transition and exchange. As patron of eloquence and communication, Mercury bestowed the gift of persuasive speech. Orators and lawyers sought his blessing before important addresses or legal cases. Schools of rhetoric sometimes displayed his image, reminding students that clear communication required both natural talent and disciplined practice. Political figures cultivated his favor, understanding that power in the Roman world often depended on one's ability to sway crowds and forge alliances through skillful speech. Mercury showed particular concern for those who traveled for their livelihood. Sailors, messengers, and those conducting diplomatic missions fell under his protection. Before departing on long journeys, Romans would sacrifice to Mercury, seeking safe passage and swift return. This aspect of Mercury reflected the growing importance of connectivity within the expanding Roman world, where communication between distant provinces and the capital became increasingly vital to imperial governance. Merchants trading in foreign goods particularly valued Mercury's protection, as he governed not just commerce, but also intercultural exchange and translation. His ability to move between different worlds made him the perfect patron for those navigating unfamiliar customs and languages. Trading companies and guilds often adopted Mercury as their special protector, establishing collegia or professional associations that combined religious devotion to Mercury with practical mutual aid among members. Mercury's association with theft and trickery reflected the Roman understanding that the same quick wit valuable in commerce could also facilitate deception. Rather than viewing this association as contradictory, Romans pragmatically acknowledged the dual potential of intelligence and adaptability. Professional thieves might offer a portion of their takings to Mercury, but so too would householders seeking protection against theft, believing that the god understood both sides of any exchange. As guide of souls to the underworld, Mercury represented the transition between life and death. Romans believed he conducted the newly deceased to the river Styx, where they would begin their journey to the afterlife. This solemn duty connected Mercury to funerary practices, and his image sometimes appeared on tombs and memorial sculptures, guiding the beloved deceased on their final journey. Families would sometimes leave coins with their dead, not just to pay the ferryman Charon, but also as offering to Mercury for safe conveyance. Mercury presided over dreams and sleep, believed to be states where humans could receive divine messages. Romans seeking guidance through dreams would pray to Mercury before sleeping, requesting clear communication from the divine realm. This connection between Mercury and the dream world reinforced his role as intermediary between mortal and divine realms, capable of bringing messages from the gods to human understanding. Despite his honored position in Roman religious life, Mercury inspired less emotional attachment than many other deities. Romans approached him with practical requests rather than passionate devotion, reflecting his own pragmatic nature. His temples featured more business-like transactions than ecstatic worship, with merchants calculating appropriate offerings based on profits received rather than emotional impulse. Throughout the Roman Empire, Mercury adapted to local conditions while maintaining his essential functions. In Gaul and Britain, he merged with Celtic deities of similar attributes, becoming especially popular among provincial merchants seeking to adopt Roman business practices. In Egypt, he blended aspects with Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. This adaptability made Mercury particularly suited to an expanding empire built on trade networks and communication systems spanning diverse cultures. As Rome evolved from republic to empire, Mercury adapted to local conditions while maintaining his essential functions. In Gaul and Britain, he merged with Celtic deities of similar attributes, becoming especially popular among provincial merchants seeking to adopt Roman business practices. In Egypt, he blended aspects with Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. This adaptability made Mercury particularly suited to an expanding empire built on trade networks and communication systems spanning diverse cultures. Mercury's shrewdness and cleverness became proverbial among Romans. Parents would pray to him to bestow intelligence and quick thinking upon their children. His name entered common speech through expressions relating to intelligence. Just as modern languages still use the term mercurial to describe someone quick-witted, volatile, and clever. Perhaps most significantly for Rome's everyday people, Mercury represented social mobility and opportunity. As a god who moved freely between divine and mortal realms, between Olympian heights and the underworld depths, he embodied the possibility of transformation and advancement through cleverness and industry. In a society where status was often determined by birth, Mercury offered hope that through commerce, communication, and cunning, one might improve one's circumstances, a particularly appealing prospect in a civilization built on trade and conquest. Throughout Roman history, Mercury remained a deity more admired than loved, more respected than worshipped with emotional fervor. His temples never inspired the awe of Jupiter's or the devotion of Venus's. Yet no Roman could imagine daily life without his subtle influence facilitating every transaction, communication, and journey. In Mercury, the practical Romans found a divine reflection of their own pragmatic approach to life, resourceful, adaptable, and always willing to find a path forward, no matter how difficult the terrain. Chapter 7, Neptune, Lord of the Seas. When Romans gazed upon the vast waters surrounding their peninsula, they saw not merely waves and tides, but the realm of Neptune, mighty sovereign of the seas and waters, whose divine power determined the fortune of sailors, fishermen, and all who depended upon maritime commerce for their livelihood. Though Romans were never primarily a seafaring people like their Greek or Phoenician neighbors, the growing importance of Mediterranean trade and naval power made Neptune an increasingly significant deity in the expanding empire. Neptune's origins in Roman religion reach back to ancient times, when he was primarily worshipped as a god of freshwater, rivers, lakes, and springs vital to an agricultural society. His very name possibly derives from words relating to moisture and flowing water. As Rome grew from farming community to naval power, Neptune's domain expanded accordingly to encompass the vast salt seas. While never forgetting his connection to inland waters, Romans came to know him primarily as ruler of the ocean depths and all creatures dwelling therein. Romans depicted Neptune as a mature, bearded figure of imposing stature, often nude or draped in sea-green garments, carrying his distinctive trident with which he could stir the waters or split rocks. Sometimes, he rode a chariot pulled by hippocamps, fantastic creatures with horses' forequarters and fish-like tails. These magnificent beasts symbolized Neptune's mastery over both land and sea, demonstrating his power to traverse and rule both elements. The Romans celebrated Neptune's festival, the Neptunalia, during the hottest, driest days of summer, on July 23rd. During this ancient celebration, Romans constructed temporary huts of branches and foliage called umbri, under which they feasted and drank while seeking respite from the summer heat. These leafy shelters represented a sympathetic connection to water through shade and coolness during the parched season when Neptune's moisture was most desperately needed. Participants would pour libations into the ground, symbolically returning water to the earth and honoring the god's control over this precious resource. Beyond his dominion over water, Neptune wielded frightful power over earthquakes, earning him the epithet Earth Shaker. Romans understood that the same divine force controlling the volatile seas could also make the solid ground tremble and crack. This dual capability made Neptune a deity to be approached with particular caution and respect, for his power touched the most fundamental elements of the physical world, both the waters upon which ships sailed and the land upon which cities were built. Sailors naturally formed the core of Neptune's devoted worshippers. Before embarking on voyages, they would sacrifice to the sea god, begging for calm waters and favorable winds. Upon safe return to harbor, they would fulfill vows made during moments of peril at sea, dedicating offerings at his temples, or placing commemorative tablets expressing gratitude for divine protection. These tablets, often depicting ships caught in storms or sea monsters threatening vessels, documented both the terrors of ancient seafaring and the perceived power of Neptune to preserve those who properly honored him. Unlike some deities whose worship remained primarily centered in Rome itself, Neptune's cult spread wherever Roman ships sailed. Colonial ports throughout the empire maintained temples or shrines to Neptune, where local sailors and merchants could seek his blessing before undertaking dangerous maritime journeys. From Britain to North Africa, from Spain to Syria, coastal cities under Roman influence displayed statues of the sea god, often placed prominently near harbors as a reminder of his constant presence in maritime affairs. Fishermen maintained a special relationship with Neptune. Understanding their livelihood depended entirely upon his goodwill. Before setting out with their nets, they would make small offerings, perhaps a portion of their previous catch returned to the waters, or wine poured into the sea. They believed Neptune controlled the movement of fish shoals and could direct abundant catches toward those who properly acknowledged his sovereignty over marine life. The Romans understood Neptune as husband to Salacia, goddess of salt water and the deep sea. Though less prominently worshipped than her divine husband, Salacia represented the nurturing aspects of the ocean, its bounty of fish, and its life-sustaining qualities. Together, this divine couple embodied the dual nature of the sea itself, Neptune its power and majesty, Salacia its fertility and sustenance. Their union symbolized the complex relationship Romans maintained with the ocean, viewing it simultaneously as source of wealth and ever-present danger. As Rome's naval power grew under the Republic and reached its height during the early empire, Neptune's importance in state religion increased accordingly. After naval victories, successful admirals would dedicate portions of captured enemy ships at Neptune's temples. The Emperor Augustus, following his crucial victory at Actium that consolidated his power, paid special homage to Neptune, acknowledging the sea god's role in his triumph. Naval displays and mock sea battles staged for public entertainment often began with sacrifices to Neptune, seeking his blessing for the spectacles about to unfold. Neptune also received recognition in Rome's architectural achievements. The enormous bath complexes that became hallmarks of Roman civilization featured elaborate fountains and pools dedicated to the water god. These monumental structures celebrated Rome's mastery over water, the ability to channel it across vast distances via aqueducts and distribute it throughout urban centers. Even as Romans demonstrated their engineering prowess, they acknowledged that the fundamental element with which they worked remained under Neptune's divine authority. Though Romans borrowed heavily from Greek conceptions of Poseidon when developing Neptune's imagery and mythology, they maintained distinctive aspects of his worship that reflected their particular relationship with water. While Greek coastal cities naturally embraced their sea god with enthusiasm, Romans approached Neptune with more practical concerns, focusing on his role in protecting commerce, supporting naval power, and providing fresh water for agriculture. Throughout Roman history, Neptune remained somewhat aloof from the political intrigues and romantic entanglements that characterized Olympian myths. Unlike Jupiter, Venus, or Mars, Neptune seldom featured prominently in state propaganda or imperial imagery. Yet his enduring presence in Roman religious life, from humble fishermen's prayers to elaborate naval ceremonies, testified to the fundamental importance of water to Roman civilization. In Neptune, Romans recognized a primal force that could never be fully tamed, but must instead be respected and properly honored so that his mighty powers might benefit rather than destroy human endeavors upon his watery domain. Chapter 8. Vulcan, Master of the Forge. In the rumbling heart of volcanoes and the intense heat of the forge, Romans perceived the divine presence of Vulcan, the mighty craftsman god who bent metal to his will and taught mortals the transformative power of fire. Unlike many deities who represented natural phenomena in their raw state, Vulcan embodied the uniquely human ability to harness and transform nature through skill and ingenuity, making him a god who represented civilization's triumph over raw elements. The Romans identified Vulcan primarily as master of fire in both its creative and destructive aspects. As patron of blacksmiths, metalsmiths, and all craftsmen who worked with flame, he represented the positive, constructive use of fire that enabled human advancement through tools, weapons, and ornaments. Yet Romans also recognized in Vulcan the uncontrollable, devastating potential of fire that could consume entire cities when unleashed. This dual nature made him a deity approached with particular caution and respect. Vulcan's origins in Roman religion are ancient, possibly predating the founding of Rome itself. Early Italic peoples worshipped fire deities, and as Rome developed, Vulcan emerged as the personification of this essential but dangerous element. His name may derive from the Latin word for flash or lightning, connecting him to dramatic manifestations of fire in nature. Roman tradition depicted Vulcan as a powerful but lame god, walking with the aid of a staff or crutches. Unlike many Roman deities represented with idealized physiques, Vulcan's image acknowledged his imperfection, perhaps reflecting the real-world dangers faced by human smiths, who often suffered injuries in their dangerous profession. Despite this physical limitation, Romans considered him a master craftsman of extraordinary skill, capable of creating works of divine perfection at his celestial forge. The Romans celebrated Vulcan's primary festival, the Vulcanalia, on August 23rd, during the hottest, driest part of the Roman year, when the threat of fire was greatest. On this day, Romans would begin work at first light, with lamps lit as offerings to the god. Small live fish or animals might be cast into flames as sacrifices, symbolically feeding the fire that was Vulcan's element. The timing of this festival during the harvest season also connected Vulcan to agricultural concerns, particularly protection of stored grain from conflagration. Beyond this main festival, Romans acknowledged Vulcan's power throughout the year through continuous precautions against fire. Professional firefighters in Rome, organized into cohorts, paid special devotion to Vulcan, seeking his help in controlling his element when it threatened to consume the densely packed wooden structures of the city. After major fires, Romans would often erect shrines to Vulcan outside city boundaries, hoping to keep his destructive aspect at a safe distance while still honoring his power. Blacksmiths naturally formed the core of Vulcan's devoted worshippers. Their workshops contained small shrines to the divine smith, where offerings would be made before beginning important work. These craftsmen understood that their ability to transform raw metal into tools, weapons, and art came through Vulcan's blessing. When significant metallurgical projects succeeded, particularly the casting of large bronze statues or architectural elements, smiths would attribute their success to Vulcan's guidance. The relationship between Vulcan and Rome's military power was particularly significant. As creator of weapons and armor, Vulcan contributed directly to Roman military dominance. Before major campaigns, generals might sacrifice to Vulcan alongside Mars, acknowledging that victory required both martial courage and superior weaponry. The sound of hammers in military forges across the empire echoed Vulcan's own work, transforming raw metal into the tools that would expand and defend Roman civilization. Roman mythology connected Vulcan to Venus through marriage, though their union was not depicted as particularly harmonious. This divine pairing represented the meeting of opposites. The rough, sooty smith god joined to the goddess of beauty and refinement. Some scholars suggest this mythological marriage symbolized the Roman understanding that the useful arts of civilization, Vulcan's domain, enabled the refinements and luxuries associated with Venus. Under the influence of Greek mythology, later Roman traditions attributed to Vulcan a workshop beneath volcanic mountains, particularly Mount Etna in Sicily. There, aided by the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants skilled in metallurgy, He was said to forge thunderbolts for Jupiter and weapons for other gods. The rumbling of volcanoes and the glow of lava were understood as signs of Vulcan's forge in operation deep within the earth. Despite his importance to fundamental aspects of Roman civilization, Vulcan never achieved the prominence in state religion enjoyed by Jupiter, Mars, or Venus. His worship remained somewhat marginalized, with his primary temples located outside the sacred boundary of Rome itself, reflecting the ambivalent relationship Romans maintained with fire. They recognized its essential nature for civilization, yet feared its destructive potential, just as they acknowledged Vulcan's crucial contributions, while keeping his cult somewhat separate from the city's ceremonial core. Archaeological evidence suggests that Vulcan's worship was particularly strong in areas with significant metallurgical industries. Cities like Ostia, Rome's port, maintained important temples to Vulcan where merchants and craftsmen involved in the metal trade would make offerings. These commercial connections demonstrate how Vulcan's cult encompassed not just the technical aspects of metalworking, but also the economic prosperity it generated through trade and manufacture. Throughout Roman history, Vulcan remained a god more honored than loved, more respected than celebrated. His domain of fire and forge represented necessities of civilization rather than its pleasures or glories. Yet without Vulcan's gifts, the knowledge of metalworking and the harnessing of fire, Romans understood that their civilization could never have risen from humble beginnings to world dominance. In Vulcan, Romans recognized both the transformative power of human craft and the ever-present dangers of the forces humans sought to control. A fitting deity for a people whose practical mastery of material resources formed the foundation of their imperial might. Chapter 9. Ceres, Bringer of Harvest. When golden grain rippled across Italian fields and fruit trees bent beneath their abundant yield, Romans gave thanks to Ceres, divine patroness of agriculture, whose blessing ensured full stomachs and prosperity throughout the land. No deity touched the daily lives of ordinary Romans more directly than this goddess, who governed the eternal cycles of planting and harvest upon which civilization itself depended. Ceres ranked among the oldest and most significant deities in the Roman pantheon. Her worship dated to prehistoric times when early Italic peoples performed rituals to ensure agricultural abundance. Her very name derives from the root that gives us cereal, reflecting her fundamental connection to grain cultivation, the foundation of Roman diet and economy. As Rome evolved from farming village to world empire, Ceres remained essential to Roman identity, a constant reminder of the agricultural roots from which their civilization grew. The Romans celebrated Ceres through multiple festivals throughout the agricultural year, each marking crucial points in the cycle of growth. The Cerealia, her primary festival, took place in April when crops were sprouting. During this celebration, participants dressed in white carried burning torches in procession, commemorating the goddess's mythical search for her daughter. Games held in her honor featured circus races, where foxes with burning torches tied to their tails were released into the Circus Maximus, a ritual whose original meaning had become obscure even to the Romans themselves. Beyond formal festivals, Romans acknowledged Ceres in daily life through the sacred nature of bread itself. The first portion of any meal might be dedicated to her, a simple household offering recognizing her gift of sustenance. Farmers performed countless small rituals throughout the agricultural cycle, before plowing, during sowing, at first sprout, and especially at harvest, each designed to maintain divine favor and ensure Ceres would continue blessing their fields with abundance. Ceres held special significance for Roman women, who saw in her not just the fertility of fields, but also maternal nurturing. Her mythology portrayed her as a devoted mother whose love for her daughter, Proserpina, exemplified maternal devotion. Women seeking to conceive or safely deliver children would pray to Ceres alongside specialized birth goddesses, recognizing the connection between agricultural fertility and human reproduction. This maternal aspect made Ceres particularly beloved among ordinary Romans, whose family lives centered around child-rearing and household management. The worship of Ceres formed a crucial component of plebeian religious identity in Rome. When the plebeians struggled for political rights against patrician domination in the early Republic, they adopted Ceres as their special patroness. Her temple on the Aventine Hill, established in 493 before the Common Era, became a center for plebeian political activity. The plebeian aediles, important officials who oversaw grain supply, conducted their business from her temple. This political dimension added another layer to Ceres' significance, making her not just a goddess of natural abundance, but also of social justice and proper distribution of resources. Romans depicted Ceres as a mature woman of dignified bearing, typically crowned with a wreath of wheat or corn ears, carrying a torch and basket of fruit or grain. Often she held the cornucopia, the horn of plenty overflowing with earth's bounty, symbolizing her generous nature. In contrast to more remote celestial deities, Ceres' imagery emphasized her nurturing, accessible qualities, a goddess who walked among fields and understood human needs for sustenance and security. The sacred law of Ceres, that seed must be placed in the ground to generate new life, became a profound metaphorical concept in Roman thought. The mystery of plant growth, with its cycle of apparent death followed by rebirth, provided a conceptual framework for understanding human mortality. Those initiated into Ceres' mysteries gained insight into the continuity of life beyond death, finding comfort in the natural cycles the goddess governed, where nothing truly ended, but rather transformed into new forms of life. Ceres shared close associations with other agricultural deities in the Roman pantheon. She formed part of a triad with Liber and Libra, gods of viticulture and plant growth, respectively. Together, this divine group represented the full range of agricultural abundance: grain, wine, and fruits. Their collective worship emphasized the interdependence of various forms of cultivation, recognizing that Roman agriculture required attention to diverse crops and growing methods. As Rome expanded its territory, the worship of Ceres spread throughout the empire, adapting to local agricultural conditions. In grain-rich provinces like Sicily and Egypt, she received particular devotion as the divine guarantor of harvests that would feed not just local populations, but the city of Rome itself. Provincial governors understood that maintaining proper worship of Ceres was not merely a religious obligation, but a practical necessity to ensure food security for the empire. During times of agricultural crisis, drought, blight, or poor harvests, Romans would perform special supplicatory rituals to regain Ceres' favor. These might include elaborate processions, exceptional sacrifices, or even lectisternia ceremonies where the cult statue of Ceres would be placed on a couch at a banquet, as though the goddess herself were physically present to be honored and appeased. These emergency measures demonstrated the direct connection Romans perceived between proper religious observance and agricultural productivity. The cult of Ceres maintained special priestesses who preserved ancient rituals and knowledge. Originally, these priestesses came from Greek cities in southern Italy, bringing specialized knowledge of agricultural mysteries. Their distinctive prayers and ceremonies were conducted in Greek rather than Latin, even in Rome itself, preserving the foreign origin of these sacred rites. This Greek influence reflected the complex cultural exchanges through which Roman religion evolved, incorporating useful elements from neighboring traditions. Despite the fundamental importance of Ceres to Roman life, her worship lacked the political prominence of Jupiter's or the romantic appeal of Venus's. Her temples were important, but not among the grandest in Rome. Her festivals were earnestly observed, but without the spectacle of martial celebrations. This relative modesty in her official cult belied her profound significance in everyday life, where no deity more directly affected human welfare through the basic necessity of food. In Ceres, Romans acknowledged their continued dependence on natural cycles beyond human control, recognizing that, for all their engineering achievements and military conquests, they remained fundamentally reliant on the timely arrival of rain, the fertility of soil, and the mystery of seed transforming into nourishment. All blessings that flowed from the benevolence of a goddess who had watched over farmers since time immemorial. Chapter 10, Vesta, Keeper of the Sacred Flame. At the very heart of Rome, both literally and spiritually, burned an eternal flame tended by consecrated virgins dedicated to Vesta, goddess of the hearth and guardian of the sacred fire that symbolized the life and fortune of Rome itself. Unlike deities celebrated with grand processions or dramatic myths, Vesta represented the quiet sanctity of the home and the enduring continuity of the state. Her unquenchable flame, a visible manifestation of Roman stability across centuries. No deity stood closer to the original religious concepts of the Latin people than Vesta. Before elaborate temples or anthropomorphic gods, early Italic peoples worshipped the hearth fire itself as a divine presence that provided warmth, light, and the ability to transform raw food into nourishment. This fundamental reverence for the hearth fire evolved into the cult of Vesta, maintaining its central importance even as Roman religion grew more complex. The very name Vesta connects etymologically to words for burning, revealing her essential nature as the divine personification of sacred flame. The worship of Vesta differed fundamentally from that of other Roman deities. While most gods and goddesses were represented by human-like statues, Vesta's presence manifested solely through the eternal flame that burned in her circular temple in the Forum. No image of the goddess stood within. The fire itself was her embodiment, pure and elemental. This aniconic representation connected her cult to the most ancient forms of religious practice, predating the influence of Greek anthropomorphic deity conceptions. 6 Vestal virgins served as Vesta's priestesses, selected from noble families between the ages of 6 and 10 years old, required to maintain perfect chastity during 30 years of service. These Vestals occupied a unique position in Roman society, legally emancipated from their families, and granted privileges otherwise unavailable to women, including the right to own property, make a will, and give evidence without taking an oath. Their testimony carried immense weight, and their persons were considered inviolable. Anyone who harmed a Vestal faced death, while the Vestals themselves, should they break their vow of chastity, suffered the terrible punishment of live burial, one of the few death penalties that involved shedding no blood. The primary duty of the Vestals was maintaining the sacred flame in Vesta's temple, ensuring it never extinguished. This seemingly simple task carried tremendous spiritual significance, as Romans believed the continuity of their state directly connected to the continuity of Vesta's fire. Should the flame go out through negligence, the responsible Vestal would be scourged by the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest. The fire could be ritually rekindled only through primitive friction methods, using wood from a Felix arbor lucky tree, demonstrating the deliberate preservation of archaic practices within this most conservative of Roman cults. Beyond tending the eternal flame, Vestals prepared sacred substances used throughout Roman state religion. They maintained the mola salsa, ritually prepared salted flour essential for official sacrifices throughout the year. They drew water from a sacred spring using vessels that could not be placed on the ground, preserving the water's purity for ritual use. These practical yet sacred duties emphasized Vesta's connection to the fundamental elements of sustenance, fire, water, and grain that maintained both household and state. The circular temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum symbolized both the early round huts of Rome's founders and the shape of the earth itself. Its design deliberately evoked archaic architecture, preserving forms that had otherwise disappeared from Roman construction. Within this temple, beyond the eternal flame, the Vestals guarded certain sacred objects brought by Aeneas from Troy, according to legend. The exact nature of these objects remained a closely guarded secret, though they were believed to include the Palladium, a statue of Minerva upon which Rome's security depended. This connection to Rome's mythical Trojan origins reinforced Vesta's role as protector of the state's most ancient foundations. Romans conceptualized the relationship between family and state through the parallel worship of Vesta in household and civic contexts, Each Roman home contained a hearth dedicated to Vesta, where the family maintained its own perpetual flame when possible. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, served as priest for family worship, offering prayers and small portions of meals to Vesta's flame. Thus, the grand state cult in the Forum represented a magnified version of worship practices occurring simultaneously in thousands of Roman homes, binding civic and domestic religion into a unified system centered on the sacred hearth. The Romans celebrated Vesta through the Vestalia festival from June 7th to June 15th, a period when her normally closed temple opened to Roman matrons who entered barefoot to make offerings. During this time, donkeys were decorated with garlands and loaves of bread, acknowledging the animal's traditional association with the goddess through tales of how a donkey's braying once saved Vesta from unwanted advances by other gods. This festival emphasized Vesta's connection to ordinary women managing households, highlighting the parallel between state religion and domestic practice. Despite her fundamental importance, Vesta generally remained distant from political propaganda or artistic representation. Unlike deities whose images appeared on coins or whose mythologies provided subjects for elaborate artwork, Vesta's worship maintained a deliberate simplicity. When depicted at all, she appeared fully draped in modest robes, veiled and carrying a simple lamp or bowl. This restrained imagery reflected her nature as goddess of sacred boundaries and contained power, whose blessing manifested not through dramatic intervention, but through steady, uninterrupted continuity. Vesta's cult demonstrated remarkable stability throughout Roman history, maintaining its essential practices from earliest times through the late Empire. When other worship changed dramatically or foreign religions gained prominence, the rituals of the Vestals continued largely unchanged, providing a thread of continuity connecting Romans to their origins. Even emperors accorded special respect to Vesta and her priestesses, recognizing their symbolic importance to Roman identity regardless of political changes. The position of Pontifex Maximus, Rome's highest religious office eventually assumed by emperors, included direct supervision of the Vestals. This connection between imperial power and Vesta's ancient cult demonstrated her central importance to Roman state religion. Augustus particularly emphasized this relationship, establishing a shrine to Vesta within his own home on the Palatine Hill when he became Pontifex Maximus, symbolically bringing the state hearth under his personal protection, and identifying the continuity of his rule with the eternal flame of Rome. Throughout Roman territory, colonial settlements established their own cults of Vesta, creating a network of sacred fires symbolically connected to the original flame in Rome. This practice reinforced the conceptual unity of Roman power across diverse territories. Just as all roads led to Rome, all sacred flames throughout the empire represented extensions of the original hearth at civilization's center. This religious practice physically embodied the concept of Rome as the heart of a vast political organism extending across continents. When Christianity eventually became Rome's dominant religion, Vesta's cult stood among the longest to resist displacement. The Vestals continued their service until 391, when Emperor Theodosius I officially ended their public funding. According to tradition, when the sacred flame was extinguished after burning for over a millennium, Rome's ancient covenant with the gods who had sustained her growth from village to world empire came to an end. Within 2 decades, the city would be sacked by the Visigoths, fulfilling, in the minds of those who still honored the old ways, the ancient promise that Rome's fortune was linked inextricably to Vesta's undying flame. In Vesta, Romans found their purest expression of religious continuity, a worship focused not on elaborate mythology or dramatic divine intervention, but on the patient maintenance of sacred boundaries between chaos and order, between raw nature and civilized life. Her eternal flame illuminated Rome's understanding of itself as more than a mere political entity, but a sacred project existing under divine protection. Though her worship now exists only in historical memory, Vesta's legacy persists in the continuing human reverence for the hearth as the sacred center of domestic life, the gathering place where sustenance and community intertwine in the transformative presence of life-giving fire. Chapter 11, Pluto, Lord of the Underworld. In the shadowed realm beneath the earth, where neither sun nor stars illuminated the eternal darkness, ruled mighty Pluto, sovereign of the dead and master of subterranean wealth. Unlike Olympian deities, who frequently intervened in mortal affairs, Pluto remained a distant, mysterious figure whose domain Romans acknowledged with necessary respect rather than devotional fervor, a god whose rule all mortals would eventually experience, yet whose favor few actively sought during life. The Romans knew this underworld deity by several names, each reflecting different aspects of his complex, divine personality. As Pluto, the wealthy one, he governed the riches beneath the earth, precious metals, gems, and the fertile soil itself from which crops grew. As Dispater, the rich father, he ruled over the accumulated wealth of generations past. And as Orcus, he represented death personified, the inevitable force that claims all living beings. These various identities demonstrated Roman understanding that the underworld contained both terrors and treasures, both endings and potential for regeneration. Unlike many Roman deities who had temples throughout the city, Pluto received worship primarily at a subterranean altar in the Campus Martius called the Tarentum or Tarentum. This site, associated with a volcanic vent or thermal spring, provided an appropriate connection to the underworld through its geothermal activity. Here, rare rituals to Pluto and other chthonic deities took place, mostly conducted at night when darkness symbolically connected the upper world with the lower realms over which he presided. The most significant worship of Pluto occurred during the secular games, Ludi Seculares. Extraordinary festivals held roughly once every century to mark the end of one saeculum generation or age and the beginning of another. During these elaborate ceremonies, black victims, appropriate to underworld deities, were sacrificed to Pluto, and his divine consort Proserpina at the Tarentum altar at night while daytime ceremonies honored celestial deities with white sacrificial animals. This rare state recognition of underworld powers emphasized the Romans' belief that proper transition between historical ages required acknowledging both upper and lower divine realms. Despite his fearsome domain, Romans did not view Pluto as evil or malevolent, but rather as a necessary counterbalance to deities governing life and growth. They understood death not as punishment, but as the natural completion of life's cycle. Pluto maintained order in his realm, just as Jupiter did in the heavens and Neptune in the seas. Prayers directed to him generally sought not personal favor, but proper treatment of departed loved ones in the afterlife, requesting that the god receive the dead kindly into his kingdom. Romans depicted Pluto as a mature, bearded figure seated on a throne, often holding a scepter symbolizing his royal authority over his dark realm. Frequently accompanied by Cerberus, the multi-headed hound who guarded the underworld's entrance, Pluto's imagery emphasized his role as ruler rather than agent of death itself. Unlike modern conceptions of death as a reaper or skeletal figure, Roman art portrayed the lord of the underworld with dignity befitting a king, albeit one ruling a somber domain. The mythology surrounding Pluto centered on his abduction of Proserpina, known to Greeks as Persephone, daughter of Ceres. According to this tale, which Romans adapted from Greek sources, Pluto seized the maiden while she gathered flowers, carrying her to his underworld kingdom as his unwilling bride. After her mother's desperate search and Jupiter's intervention, a compromise allowed Proserpina to spend part of each year above ground with her mother and part below with her husband. Romans interpreted this cycle as explanation for seasonal changes, Proserpina's return bringing spring's renewal, her descent causing winter's barrenness. Beyond this central myth, Pluto figured relatively little in Roman religious storytelling. Unlike other major deities, whose adventures and interactions filled poetry and art, the lord of the underworld remained appropriately remote from daily life. When Romans told tales of the afterlife or divine judgment, they often focused instead on semi-divine figures associated with Pluto's realm. Judges like Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who determined the fate of souls, or punishers like the Furies who tormented the guilty. The concept of the underworld itself evolved throughout Roman history, incorporating influences from Etruscan, Greek, and eventually Eastern religious thought. Early Roman belief envisioned a relatively undifferentiated shadowland where the dead existed as diminished versions of themselves, neither particularly punished nor rewarded. Later conceptions, heavily influenced by Greek ideas, developed more elaborate visions of judgment and distinct regions for different categories of souls: Elysium for the virtuous, Tartarus for the wicked, and the fields of asphodel for ordinary souls. Throughout these evolutions, Pluto remained constant as the realm's sovereign, adapting to changing theological landscapes while maintaining his essential role. Certain professionals maintained special connections to Pluto due to their work. Miners, who extracted metals from beneath the earth, would offer prayers to him for protection and rich discoveries. undertakers, and those who prepared bodies for burial or cremation, acknowledged his authority over their grim but necessary profession. Farmers recognized his dual nature as both death bringer and wealth provider, understanding that decomposition and renewal formed inseparable parts of agricultural cycles. For these individuals, Pluto represented not a distant theological concept, but a divine power directly relevant to their daily activities. While most Romans approached Pluto with appropriate gravity rather than affection, magical practitioners sometimes attempted to harness underworld powers for their own purposes. Curse tablets, depictions, lead sheets inscribed with maledictions against enemies, were often dedicated to underworld deities, including Pluto, buried in graves or thrown into wells to reach the lower realm. These magical practices existed at the margins of official religion, representing private attempts to activate chthonic powers for personal advantage rather than state-sanctioned worship. As Rome encountered Eastern mystery cults promising personal salvation and blessed afterlife, attitudes toward death and the underworld gradually shifted. While traditional Roman religion focused primarily on proper ritual and maintaining pax deorum, peace with the gods, in this life, new religious movements emphasized personal transformation and specific afterlife rewards. Within this evolving religious landscape, Pluto's traditional role gradually diminished in importance, though never disappearing entirely from Roman spiritual consciousness. The Roman relationship with Pluto reflected their practical approach to mortality itself, acknowledging its inevitability while focusing primarily on proper living in the present world. Neither excessively dreading death nor seeking premature passage to the afterlife, Romans typically approached Pluto with appropriate respect rather than terror or devotion. In this balanced perspective, they demonstrated the characteristic Roman virtue of gravitas, a serious engagement with life's most profound realities without either morbid obsession or frivolous disregard. Through Pluto, Romans contemplated the mysteries that lie beyond mortal existence, recognizing that, beneath the visible world of sunlight and activity, existed another realm equally real and significant. The Lord of the underworld reminded Romans that their bustling city, for all its monumental stone and imperial ambition, existed temporarily upon the surface of a world whose depths contained both material treasure and metaphysical truth, a necessary counterbalance to the bright optimism of Mediterranean civilization. In Pluto's summer sovereignty, Romans acknowledged the boundaries of mortal achievement and the universal destination awaiting even the mightiest emperor, a humbling recognition that perhaps contributed to the famous Roman cultural emphasis on remembering mortality even in moments of greatest triumph. Chapter 12. Diana, Mistress of the Hunt. Diana embodied contradictions that reflected her complex divine nature, as she harmonized the gentle grace of moonlit silence with the fierce intensity of the chase. Her presence offered solace to the solitary and strength to the daring in the quiet forests of ancient Italy, Her spirit danced between the delicate art of nurturing life and the relentless pursuit of wild freedom. Her footsteps were both a silent prayer and a resounding call to those who revered the wild essence of nature and the protective power of the hunt. The goddess remained ever vigilant amidst shifting shadows of mortal existence, and her sacred groves echoed with the soft murmur of devotees seeking her favor upon the rising of a silvery dawn. Each pilgrim would offer humble tokens of fresh flora and tender harvest to honor her eternal duality, because in Diana there dwelled both the light of hope and the solemn truth of mortal limitation, a reminder that within every heart the soft bloom of gentleness may coexist with the untamed spirit of survival. Chapter 13. Bacchus, god of ecstasy and revelry. Bacchus emerged from the ancient earth as the divine patron of wine and celebration. His joyous rites transformed humble vineyards into places of magic, and his divine presence infused the air with the promise of renewed life in bustling forums and secluded groves. The followers of Bacchus gathered to raise their voices in exaltation and partake in the sacred ritual of communal mirth. In the shimmering glow of evening, each draught of fermented fruit became a libation to the eternal cycle of passion and creativity. Through his exuberant festivals, every soul found an opportunity to cast aside the burdens of daily toil and surrender to the transformative power of revelry. The gentle cadence of flowing wine and harmonious laughter served to remind all that the pursuit of bliss and the embrace of life were as central to the divine order as were sacrifice and solemn duty. For in Bacchus there existed a divine liberation that bridged the realms of mortal constraint and heavenly delight. Chapter 14. Saturn, guardian of time and abundance. Saturn presided over the ancient rhythms of life, and his dominion stretched across the fertile fields and the endless march of time. In the quiet turning of the seasons, his influence was felt in every planted seed and every gathered harvest. For early communities, the rituals in his honor symbolized both the inevitable passage of days and the promise of renewed bounty. In the jubilant festival of Saturnalia, the world was transformed as traditional roles shifted, and every heart rejoiced in the timeless dance of renewal through the sacred rites of harvest and celebration. Saturn imparted lessons of resilience and hope to a people bound by the cycles of nature. His gentle yet resolute presence was a constant reminder that from the depths of decay new life could emerge, and that every ending was but the prelude to a grand beginning. In his eternal gaze, all who tended the earth found both solace and inspiration. Chapter 15. Janus, keeper of begins and endings. Janus stood as the mysterious sentinel at the threshold of every passage. His two faces looked upon both the past and the future, as he kept watch over every entrance and exit in every door and passageway. The silent guardian offered guidance and assurance that transitions were met with divine blessing. For each departing step and every new arrival, his presence was a steady reminder that life was an ever unfolding journey of beginnings and endings. As the ancient Romans journeyed through times of change and transformation, they sought the counsel of Janus The deity symbolized the unity of what had been and what was yet to come, his dual vision bridging the realms of memory and anticipation through his quiet observance. Every opening door became a portal of promise, and every closing gate a testament to the enduring cycle of renewal. Thus, the divine tapestry of ancient Rome was woven from the timeless threads of gods and goddesses, each embodying aspects of human endeavor and natural wonder. Their eternal narratives continued to inspire the hearts of generations. And in the sacred memory of a civilization, their voices resounded as a testament to the eternal glory of the divine order.